stand here introducing Ryan Jenkins. He will give you a speech, the title, Learning from Tinkering. He currently works on the Explorer in San Francisco. He developed a Tinkering studio, where people can explore science, art, and technology, even the delightful ideas. Okay, that's a great. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's take pleasure to welcome the wonderful Ryan Jenkins.
Thanks. Is on? Hello? Okay, great. I don't know if I need the microphone, but I'll use it anyway. I can talk kind of loud for the whole room. So thanks to everyone here for welcoming me here to talk a little bit about tinkering. This is part of a 3-day workshop that me and 3 of my colleagues are going to be leading with some members of the staff here at the museum, some other teachers and collaborators nearby. But we thought that before we did that, have the opportunity to share with a little bit of a larger audience about where I come from at the Exploratorium in San Francisco, what makes up the qualities of tinkering for our group, and why we think that's important for learning, and why that gives you some interesting learning outcomes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We're actually going to get the chance to try some things out, to get our hands on some materials. And I'm also going to show just a couple of videos of the Tinkering Studio in action at the Exploratorium in San Francisco. But I wanted to kind of give the overview of the museum which I work at. This is a science center similar to this one. It was founded about 50 years ago by someone called Frank Oppenheimer, who was a physicist who actually worked on the atomic bomb with his brother, J. Robert Oppenheimer. And so they were working on this, and afterwards he became a rancher and a high school teacher, and he was someone who, in his high school classes, developed a lot of demonstrations and exhibits, things for his students to play with. And these devices kind of started the collection of exhibits at the Exploratorium, so things that explore light and color, sound, magnetism, pendulums. So now the museum is full of about 600 of these exhibits, both in traditional physics topics, but also in areas of biology, thinking about the environment, thinking about social science and human behavior. But one of the things I think is most interesting about the Exploratorium is that the exhibit shop, so the place where all these exhibits are made, is open and it's on display. And so anyone can come into the museum and see the men and the women who are coming up with ideas for exhibits, who are using tools, who are discussing, what's the best way to try these things out on the floor. This is really the heart of the museum, and it kind of emphasizes these qualities of the museum that we care about, that it's open, it's transparent, these things don't just come out of nowhere, but actually there are people who are there working on them and getting to build everything that people are playing with inside the museum. Oops. So one of the things that our team got inspired by is the fact that, on the left of this image, you can see the exhibit shop. We wanted to see if we could engage visitors, kids and adults, anyone who came into the museum, in this process of using tools, working with your hands, trying things out for yourselves, the similar process of what happens when people build exhibits at the museum. So over here, we have a public space called the Tinkering Studio, where people can engage in some of those same practices and try out some of those same skills. So here's kind of a photo of the space in action. So on any given day, People might be connecting basic circuits, so batteries, light bulbs, switches, with alligator clips, something similar to what's on this table over here, to explore electricity. People be building flying objects out of recycled material, out of paper and plastic and cups, that move and dance in interesting ways on a column of air produced by this wind table. And then in the back, one of the activities that we do is called scribbling machines, where people are making contraptions out of recycled materials that have a motor that make them move and spin and dance around and trace out of patterns by attaching markers to them. So you can kind of see all the different ways that people are exploring and building different art-making machines. And we've also developed a space inside the museum that's actually also visible, which is our research and development lab, where a group of staff members, artists, tinkerers, and makers can come in and experiment with different types of tools and technologies. And all together we are trying these things out and playing and messing around with things in an attempt to try to figure out what would be fun and interesting to try with people who come into the museum. And in this space, you can kind of see we have lots of materials, lots of tools, lots of kind of half-finished ideas out on the table. And in this space, we also have different artists who we work with. So people who come in and spend from one day to a couple months working with our team and investigating together about some material or some technology. So we have someone from a group called the Cardboard Institute of Technology. So people who built an entire labyrinth out of cardboard in our tinkering studio space, and also worked on making hats and costumes. Someone who cuts milk cartons to make these interesting geometric shapes. People who build models of their neighborhood out of brightly colored boxes that they paint. This guy, Tim Hunkin, who experiments with metal working and welding. And Scott Weaver in the middle, who actually built a sculpture of San Francisco out of over 100,000 toothpicks that you can roll a ping pong ball through and take a tour of the city. And I think it's also important that to share just that there's a team of us who are coming up with these activities and developing these ideas, and that we're not all experts in science or engineering. We didn't necessarily study these things in school. In fact, you can kind of see like the wide variety of different backgrounds and different things that we studied. And I think this is really important, that to explore and teach about these subjects, you don't have to have a formal background or education in them, but I think what's really important is having curiosity and an ability to try and test and experiment with things. So that's a little bit about who I am and where I come from and the group that I work with. And I wanted to just share a little bit about this word, tinkering. I don't know, how many people have heard that word before? Okay. Oh, it's okay if you don't. It's kind of a weird word. It's actually a word that's a little bit, I think, hard to translate, especially into other languages. And what it originally means is a person who goes around fixing household objects. So I think there's these collection of guys, I think it's usually guys, who are going around a city, and they're doing things like fixing your umbrella, or making copies of your keys, or sharpening your knives. And I think there's something about the quality of this profession where people they're not quite sure exactly what they're going to end up doing or what the job at hand will be, but they have to use this mix of what they've done in the past. They have to improvise. They have to try to make solutions that work. And I think from this older idea of tinkering has come this sort of wider range of tinkered solutions to problems. So these are things that, they're not necessarily the most beautiful or the most functional, but they kind of get the job done. And I think throughout lots of different places and lots of different cultures, wherever you are in the world, you have people who are making do with the things that they have around them and trying to make solutions to the things that they need from whatever they have on hand and from their playfulness and improvisation. One thing that I think is sort of important for us is this distinction between tinkering and making. So I know, at least in the US, there's a lot of interest in what's called the maker movement. Make Magazine is a publication started about 10 years ago by Dale Doherty and Tim O'Reilly, and this idea that kind of harkening back to an older generation of popular mechanics where there was magazines or resources for people to see projects and tools and technologies. And they've come up with this magazine, and now they have a maker fairs all over the world. So these festivals and gatherings where people come and share their projects and talk about the things that they've built and that they've made. And while I think making and Maker Faire and Make Magazine is a really great resource, and it's something that we've worked a lot with, I feel like there's a difference between making and tinkering. A lot of time making implies certain types of technologies, things like 3D printers and drones and robots. I think usually it's centered around a male audience, as you can kind of see from the covers of the magazine. And a lot of times what you're doing when you're making is building something that's the product of someone else's thinking. And for us, when you're tinkering, you're really following your own ideas and your own processes. And I also think it's important to kind of draw a distinction between tinkering and engineering. And while when doing tinkering, I think you are trying out a lot of the processes that an engineer does. I think when you're doing engineering, you're often trying to come up with a very precise and replicable solution. And you're oftentimes trying to work in a very specific challenge. So, who can make the tallest tower, or who can make the longest bridge that supports a certain amount of weight. And again, while this is interesting, I think with tinkering, we're trying to kind of expand out, be something a little bit broader than just finding engineering solutions to things. And I also think it's important about the aesthetic or the way engineering or engineers tend to look. I think this is just like sort of the Google image that comes up when you search for engineering, and it's lots of blueprints and gears and circuit boards. And I think to me, this appeals to someone who already is interested in these subjects and these ideas, sort of that you have to be an expert. And I think with tinkering, we're really trying to broaden the ideas. Even people who don't think of themselves as someone who's good at science or engineering can try out some of these activities and explorations. So it's hard for us to come up with a definition of tinkering. And maybe the best two-word definition that I've come up with, at least as of now, is this idea of meaningful learning. And so when you're thinking of meaningful learning, I think it really comes about where the ideas come from, where the motivation for the learning happens. And for us, when you're tinkering, the motivation comes from yourself and from following your own ideas and your own curiosities. We often say the big idea is their idea, which means that as teachers and facilitators, we're most interested in following the ideas and the thinking that is important to the people who are trying out the activities, not important to us as someone who's trying to give knowledge or transmit knowledge to a learner. And so just for a little academic background, I think these ideas really come from like a long history of thinkers and educators who've been working with these ideas. So there's this Swiss psychologist named Jean Piaget, and about 100 years ago, he was working in schools and universities, and he developed a theory of learning that says that when you're actually really learning something, it's not, it's not like this where someone's standing in front of a lecture hall telling things to people, but that people learn things through actually trying things and doing and creating knowledge in their head. And so instead of this idea that learners are a blank slate or an empty jar that needs to be filled, the idea is that people are actively constructing their own ideas about the world around them. And then one of his students is this guy, Seymour Papert, who made these kind of interesting computer-like robots about 40 or 50 years ago that drew patterns all over the floor called turtles. And his idea kind of followed on to Piaget, and he was saying that people learn best, they learn for themselves, but there's a special kind of learning that happens when you're actively making an object. You're physically building something or working with materials that represents your process and your way of thinking. So these ideas, have continued for many years. I just want to, many people are still thinking about these ideas and writing about them in an academic setting, especially at MIT Media Lab. One of our colleagues, Rika Rose Roque, who developed a program for kids and adults to experiment with programming together, kind of has taken these ideas and thinking about how they work in an immigrant context. So when people are coming into the US and they're just kind of getting a sense of the culture and joining in, how can we make projects and tinkering that are relevant to people, in their own cultures and for their own place that they are in their life in the moment. So I think these ideas are continuing to be shaped. And I think for us as well, in this book that people can check out after I'm done, but this was an opportunity for our team to develop some things that we're interested in, some design principles around tinkering that we feel are important. And these kind of go from the practical, like look at real world examples around you. I think they go to the personal, which is this idea, take your work seriously, but don't take yourself too seriously. I think it goes the poetic, like embrace your tools. And there's lots of people who are thinking about these different aspects of tinkering and what makes this a valuable learning process. So there's just a couple things that I wanted to say that were really important to us about this. One of them is the idea that tinkering mixes art, science, and technology. And we find this is super important because it allows for different entry points. So there might be someone who's really interested in art who gets to explore science for the first time, or or vice versa. And I think we find that this unusual process of combining subjects that usually are stayed separate in schools allows people to feel comfortable being in a little bit of an unusual situation. So just a couple examples of the art and science technology connection. So this is something we've been doing where people are programming geometric designs on a computer by dragging and dropping blocks around. This program called Beetle Blocks, which is a website that people can try and use. And we combine that with Watercolor Bot, which is a digital machine that's controlled by your computer, but instead of a laser or instead of a blade, it moves around a paintbrush, and so it paints these designs and starts getting people thinking about programming and computer-generated art and how to make something that's beautiful and interesting to them. Another example of this is this idea of creating a collaborative light and shadow sculpture. So something where people build with LED lights, shining them through lenses and off reflective materials, and they get to both experience the physics and the science of light and shadow, but also do that to build a collaborative artistic installation. And then something we've been experimenting with is this idea of combining crafting or older techniques like painting or stencils or paper folding, and combining them with circuitry. So working with an Arduino to turn on LEDs, or we actually had a music group working with us in the Tinkering Studio a couple weeks ago who used conductive paint and copper tape to build an instrument that they could play as part of a performance in the space. And I think the other most important thing for us is, as we're thinking about how to best present these combinations of art, science, and technology, we often use the idea of a house as a metaphor for how we're designing these activities. And the house has certain qualities that make the activities work well. The first is this idea of a low threshold, so that the activities are, so it's like a low step to get into the house. So the idea that people can quickly get started with the activities. The prompts kind of make an easy access point. There's some materials and some things that people might be familiar with, and they can quickly get started and be excited about what's going on. We're interested in this house having wide walls, or in terms of an activity, we're interested in people coming up with a lot of different solutions. We're not so interested in an activity everyone leaves with the exact same thing, but we think it's important that everyone can create their own ideas and their own versions of the projects. And a lot of times those things are things that, as activity designers, we haven't even imagined and we didn't know would be possible in the activity. And people come up with these new and innovative solutions. And then the last thing is this idea of a high ceiling, so that even though these activities are fun and playful and they start out simple, you can go really far and get very complex in your study and exploration of motions and mechanisms, or light and shadow, or use some of those techniques around creative circuitry to create amazing art installations. So that's a little bit of kind of an intro of tinkering, and I know there's a lot of kids around too, so I thought that we could spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes actually trying out a tinkering experience, or maybe just the start of a tinkering experience. So on this table in the front of the room, I put out some batteries, light bulbs, alligator clips, and different metallic objects that can also conduct electricity. So I thought we'd spend just maybe 5 or 10 minutes exploring these things to see if we can build some homemade switches. So if people want, they can come up to the table and try to play with and experiment with some of these things, or you can take some of them and bring them somewhere around the room. And we'll do this for about 5 minutes. And as we're doing this, I'm also gonna play a video on the screen of some of the other ways that you can think about making homemade switches. Okay? So you guys can come on. I think the last thing I wanted to show is just kind of like a very simple version. Yeah, you guys can come over and see. This isn't going to be super impressive, but it's kind of a simple setup of some way to use those switches to do the things you'd like to do. So at the Exploratorium, we like to do this activity called a chain reaction, where each partner or each group, that's okay. So each group has one section of the table, and they have to start at a certain point and get something to happen somewhere else on the table. And this is a way to kind of expand the ceiling of this activity to see if you can use the switch to do something that you'd like to do. So I spent about 5 minutes making this amazing chain reaction machine that's a small version of what you can see becomes a very complicated thing that kids and adults make. But I just wanted to kind of show like how a switch can be used in these activities. So I'll just try it if you guys will. Maybe we can count down to 5.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go!
But so that this idea of like, once you know how to make aluminum foil switch, you know, you can make it do something for you so that when the domino goes down, right, the boot starts turning and you can build it into a contraption. And I think there's lots of different uses once you start to get a sense of these things. So if everyone grab back a seat, I'm going to show just a little bit of what the Tinkering Studio looks like in action at the Exploratorium. So we'll watch just a quick like 5-minute movie, and then I have a little bit more, and then if there's any questions, we can ask them. So cool. Thanks for trying the building switches with us also. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Oh, wow, that's so loud. Okay, so so what I want to do now is just kind of show, like, this is a very introductory version of this activity we called circuit boards, but there's a lot of explorations of circuits that happen at the Exploratorium. So I just wanted to share a 5-minute video just showing, I think, 5 or 6 different versions of circuit explorations that we've been doing in the space. So we'll start that.
These machines have a motor that spins, and when I plug them in, well, not quite a helicopter, but that vibration makes these move, yeah. And when you put the pens on, they can move around.
So you hold this one, and you hold this one. Now hold the metal. Now your skin is now carrying the electron, and if you guys high five, it can jump across.
Okay, great. So those are just a few of the activities that we've been thinking about when it comes to exploring circuits in the Tinkering Studio. And I think when we're doing these experiments, we've had 5 or 6 years to try these things out on the floor of the museum almost every day with a wide range of ages and different people. And a question that we get a lot from teachers and potential funders and parents is often this question of, this looks like fun, but are they learning? Or what are they learning? Or are you really learning when you're doing these sorts of tinkering activities? And I think there's lots of different ways of answering this question. I think for us, it's important that the kind of results of this, we don't care as much about the numbers or the, kind of filling out a survey, but really what are the qualities of this activity that we value that we can see in action. And maybe you saw in action, watching people try things out in the Tinkering Studio. And I also think it's important just to say that, we recognize and appreciate the fact that tinkering isn't the only way of learning, and that there is, valuable things to learn from reading a book or hearing a lecture, but there's certain aspects of the experience that if you don't have tinkering, which isn't often in either informal or formal settings, you're missing out on some things that these types of experiences are really good at reaching. So one of these things that we see is people working together and people working collaboratively. And we really value learning experiences where people are sharing ideas, they're borrowing solutions from each other, they're getting excited about the things that other people are doing in the space. And we encourage that as facilitators. I think a lot of times in school, there's the feeling of, don't look at someone else's work or don't copy someone else's answer. And I think in these tinkering activities, we're trying to encourage people to share ideas and borrow ideas, take what someone else did and, go a little bit further or add your own special spin or twist to it. Something we see a lot in these activities are people constantly developing new ways of using materials, creating solutions to their problem that they're doing. And I think that takes a lot of forms. It could just be your strategy for using the alligator clips or folding a piece of aluminum foil, but I think it also goes on to the way that you are working with and understanding these ideas around circuits and switches or motion or light and shadows. And in the process, you're having lots of different moments of success. I think another thing that we really value with this type of learning is the ability to respond to feedback. So we like to have people working where the objects on the table are telling them whether this is working, whether this isn't working. Is the light bulb turning on? Did the golf ball roll down the track the way that you expected it to? And a lot happens when you are forced to work with the actual materials, make them do what you want to do. So we find maybe it's a little bit more challenging to tinker with things like biology or poetry, because those are, you're not necessarily getting, it's not telling you whether or not it's working, but things things like physics and motion and circuits, you're actually working with something real. And for us facilitators, we support people doing that by, not immediately going into a theoretical concept, but really focusing the answers to the questions on what we can solve with the materials at hand. Another way that we describe the learning that happens through tinkering is through these moments of failure and frustration. So we purposefully design things to not work perfectly every time. And we think that these moments where things don't go as expected are signals that you are getting to a point where you don't know what's going to happen. You've surpassed your current knowledge or understanding of something, and you have to work your way through it. And I think we want to jump in at those moments and not solve people's problems for them, but work with them as they're developing their own ideas. And then finally, I think it's important to have this sense of play and whimsy in the activity. So we're seeing learning through laughter and messiness and people getting down on the ground and playing with the materials there. And we don't just do this because it makes things more fun for us, although it does, but we think that through these moments of play and imagination, you're able to feel comfortable trying something that's new and unexpected and that you didn't, you've never done before. And all of these things go together to help people create this idea of a tinkering disposition. So we get to see, like I said, these small moments of people working collaboratively, coming up with their own solutions, responding to the feedback of the objects on the table. But over a longer period of time, we feel like there are also benefits to this sort of learning. So for us, this idea of peers working together supports an idea of collaboration and community. And in the real world, as people are solving problems and working on things that are hard, they need to work with a wide variety of people and ideas. They need to synthesize those, they need to combine them together, and that's where the real new and innovative solutions to the ideas will come from, not just from a individual working, but from people who know how to collaborate and work together on these big problems that we have. We see these small iterative solutions important to this idea of developing a sense of agency in the world. So we would like to see people who feel like they have the confidence to try something, to solve a problem, to get involved with someone new, something new. And I think this has to do with both academic setting, but also in extracurricular setting, but this idea that that people can look at these complex systems and kind of understand how they work and able to think about that they have the ability to improve them or make them better. We see this idea of responding to feedback as developing the sense of respecting facts and evidence. And I think in education right now, we're moving more and more away from this idea of having to have a lot of facts and knowledge. Like there's lots of things that you can just Google it. And I think what's more important for people is that they have the ability to evaluate these sources, find the right facts, take a lot of information and sort it down for what actually is useful for themselves in the moment. We also think this idea of failure and frustration supports a longer-term ability to persist through setbacks. And we think that, through practicing these sorts of activities where things aren't always working the way you expect them to, and you're having to develop either ways of asking for help or ways of shifting goals or ways of just working through the problem, that people will start to not feel so scared when they're encountering failure and frustration, but they'll be able to develop strategies to work past those moments and get to the next step. And then finally, I think there's a lot of interest right now in terms of how do we create the next generation of scientists or engineers. And I think for me, this really, and supporting this idea of STEAM, which is like a shortened way of saying science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, which are these subjects that people are really interested in, getting more people to pursue. And to me, that there's people make a decision to engage with these things through what they find to be interesting and curious and beautiful, and that's what actually builds people's interest and gets them kind of compulsively engaged with these subjects. I think a lot of times when you see someone who's a famous astronomer or a software engineer, they got to that point not through someone telling them that they should do this or through memorizing a lot of facts, but through becoming deeply, passionately engaged and falling in love with the subject. And I think we'd like to try to create some small moments where people can have that experience of being really immersed and engaged with these subjects of science, engineering, technology, and math. And I think the idea with all these forms of learning is the hope that that learning will start to be seen as something that isn't terminal, that doesn't end at a certain point, that you don't go from the point of not knowing something to fully understanding that, but that learning is it's cumulative and it takes place over time and over an entire life and in a variety of settings. And we'd like to encourage these types of learning through tinkering that really has deep roots and kind of gets people grounded in whatever they'll end up doing, whether it's engaging with science or engaging with technology or just being interested and informed about those things in their daily life. So we've gotten the chance to share these ideas with lots of people around the world, lots of educators, people in museums, families, and we're hoping that others will take these ideas and continue to explore and experiment with them. And in that spirit, there's just a couple of resources I wanted to share that people might be interested in checking out and keeping in touch with. Our website, which is this tinkering.exploratorium.edu, has a lot of information about artists we've worked with, activities that we've tried. We have a blog where we share both the things that work well and also the kind of projects that we're still testing out and trying, kind of those half-baked ideas. One of the things that we got to make is this series of activity guides around the electricity experiments, the things that you saw in the video. So these are, you can download them for free on our website. I also brought some of them, so if you want to kind of flip through them after the talk, you can check them out. But this is kind of giving people the starting points of what materials you need to collect and how you can start working on building some of these things, either at home or in your classroom. And then finally, this about 2 years ago, we got the chance to do an online course on Coursera. So this idea of a massive open online course where educators or parents or people who are interested in this could take an online version of kind of the workshop that we're going to be doing with the staff and educators from this museum over the next couple of days. But really, it gave us the chance to share some videos of the activities in action, some interviews with artists and thinkers who've inspired us. And I think if people are interested in learning more, this would be a great place to get started. So I think that's all I have. So thanks again for having me here. And I think if anyone has questions, we have a couple minutes left over. So anyways, thanks. Yeah.
Since you mentioned that some projects that you were designed did not work very well purposely, right?
Yeah.
So may I ask a question? How you design the project, or how you select a project?
Great. Yeah, and I think it's important that for these projects, when we say we design them so that they don't always work well, that we're not designing like a specific point where it's going to fail for everyone, but just through the materials and through working with masking tape or those things, it's something that people actually have to work with and try for themselves. So one example for marble machines, we have a small marble that travels down a track, and we're using kind of a shallow molding from the floor and ceiling, not like a huge pipe. So people actually have to do the work to make it go. And then in terms of how we develop activities, it's mostly through trying them ourselves. So we spend a lot of time in the workshop that I showed you, testing out ideas, leading activities for each other, engaging with artists. And I think we find usually when we're really interested, engaged in something, when we are staying late at the end of the day and not wanting to stop building, that's usually a good sign that kids and adults will want to try it too. And then we also try things out in the tinkering studio, out on the floor of the museum, that are unfinished. So we get to a point where we have some idea about the topics, but we really like to encourage kids and adults to try it alongside us. So, yeah, thanks.
我们也可以帮你翻译。为什么问题？为什么
？What's the question?
Yeah. He has a question about the banana. How the electricity go through the banana?
When people were playing music on it? Yeah. Why?
Why?
Yes.
Electricity won't burn or broken the banana.
Oh, that's a great question. Well, so the thing that people were playing with was called Makey Makey, and this is something that's a computer board that our friend developed, and it basically pretends to be a keyboard. So it pretends to be the keyboard of your computer, because underneath each one of those letters is a little switch, just like the foil switch. And I guess it's just not enough electricity to go through your skin. Just like when we were playing with those circuits, electricity always wants to take an easy path, and it's easier for it to go through metal or a banana than it is to go through our skin. More or less. As far as I understand electricity, which is a basic understanding. I don't know if you remember, I studied literature, so I'm learning alongside you. But yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, so that was one of the things we saw of taking apart a toy. And I think it's just kind of the reverse understanding of how something works. I think you can have some understanding about how something works through, building a robot or building a toy yourself, but through going through the process of carefully dissecting something, you can see a lot of the switches and the circuits and the lights that are inside. So we often get toys from a secondhand store, from a thrift store, for a couple dollars. And through those, we really can have these in-depth investigations of how they work and maybe start some conversations about where these toys were made, how they're made, and kind of reverse engineering them from that way. But yeah, it's giving new life by destroying something. Yeah. The activities, yeah. Well, I mean, I think it comes from the fact that as we're developing these activities, I think we're not coming from like the end product of where we want people to understand, you know, what concept or what idea we're hoping that people get towards, but we start with, you know, the materials or the tools, and I think in a similar way to just by testing things out and trying it, we're working in a more practical way and not a theoretical way. But yeah, it's a good question. I think, you know, it's important. I feel like it's important to have a beginner's mindset, you know, whether or not you actually are a beginner, you know, important to come to these things with, you know, interest and curiosity. So I think we've practiced that together, if that makes sense. But it's, yeah. Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's important to be talking about something, you know, talking about some physical things, and do that pretty quickly so you don't get lost in the theoretical. But, what was I going to say? But I also think, you know, as we're working together, we're spending the time on this to do that. And I know for a lot of teachers or educators or people working in different places, it's hard to find time either to try things out for yourself or to have a discussion about what type of learning is valuable to you. But I think for us, we find that is the real work of what we're doing, is testing things out and then talking and reflecting about it together. Okay, cool. So there's some stuff down here, and I'll be around if people have other questions. But once again, just thanks for having me here. And since we'll be doing this workshop with the team from, a lot of people from the team from this museum, hopefully you'll see some of these ideas and activities here at the Science Center also, if you guys are coming by and joining in. So thanks again. Thank you so much.
Introduce the book. 这本书啊，其实有翻译成中文版的，所以有兴趣的人可以去买得到。